Take note of Taj Mahal. Our guest on this month's edition of the Berklee Online Music Is My Life podcast. I'm your host, Pat Healy. So, if you don't know who Taj Mahal is, you are in for a real trip. Emerging in the late 1960s as an enthusiast of blues and folk music, he spent his career bending genres to his own signature style. His work includes moving explorations in jazz, funk, reggae, country, rock and roll, and pretty much any style there is under the sun. He has worked with everybody from Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters to the Rolling Stones to Bob Marley and the Wailers. His songs have been covered by Eric Clapton, the Black Keys, the Blues Brothers, Natalie Cole, and more. He has won multiple Grammy Awards, and we got a chance to chat before his show last month at the Cabot Cinema in Beverly, Massachusetts, where it was such a beautiful day that he suggested we do the interview outside at a picnic bench. That's why you may hear the odd fire engine, bird, airplane, or gust of wind in the background. So, in the Music Is My Life podcast, our guests walk us through their lives in music. And Taj's journey does not disappoint. He can't quite remember where it started, though, because it's always been there.
I really literally don't recall a day in my life up to now that I have never listened to music or heard music or thought about music or had music in some kind of way, danced to it, watched dancing, been involved in it, played music.
What was the first instrument you picked up?
Voice.
And
then went to piano.
Yeah.
And clarinet, trombone, harmonica, and then guitar.
Yeah. I remember hearing an anecdote that your mom danced till she was 80 or in her 80s. Music was always around the house, and were they playing as well?
My dad played, and I didn't really know my mom played as much.
Yeah.
I found that she played piano later on, but my dad was a Caribbean classically trained musician that grew up in after the ragtime and into the swing and bebop and jazz, jump blues, big band era, all that kind of stuff. So I was born in 42, so I inherited all the music that time and didn't know this at the time. It just was a part of what it was, but I inherited all that great 30s and 40s music and some 20s music and even earlier, but just because some songs were still around. And in those days, a lot of the musicians were, a lot of the writers were, that was a different time where a writer would write a song and get as many people as he possibly could to play it and create a version of it. Mm-hmm. More revenue for him. The guy played differently. Somebody liked this version and that one too. But yeah, I heard a lot of different kinds of music. And we had a piano in the home and we had a record player. And my dad, just like a lot of people at the time, if you could afford to, collected the records of, Louis Jordan, One and Only Harris, Bull Moose Jackson, Count Basie, Billy Eckstine, Harry James, some of the Dorseys, think about something, and, long-haired stuff like Lily Pons and Andre Castellanos, and then living in a neighborhood that was multi-ethnic to the max. Is that you heard people, would come home in the daytime, take their shoes off, open the tie, Mama would pour the wine, and then Dad would sit there and listen to opera. The opera would be coming out, So you got to know the voices of, Ezio Pinza and Enrico Caruso and Mario Lanza, and then, of course, later, Pavarotti and Placido Domingo.
Okay, yeah.
Boy, I love
the maestro.
Just love what he does.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about people passing down songs and putting their own spins on it. And when I think about your music, one of the songs that I think is such a defining song is Stagger Lee, which has been with you since the beginning, as far as I can tell.
Oh yeah, it was actually before I started playing music.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's
yeah. I mean, it's an old song, but how I got it through kind of the R&B,
the Lloyd
Price, and just in the midst of one day listening to the lyrics, I was like, this is an older song than this. This didn't just happen right now.
Yeah.
Somebody didn't just write this for rock and roll. I mean, even R&B. But yeah, and it made me always keep my ears open. And then, of course, in the '60s, when a lot of that music was coming around, particularly through the University of Massachusetts, where I was going, which I realize now, if I probably had gone to HBC, a historically black college in the South, I probably would have missed the music that I actually got in touch with.
Huh.
Because Springfield had Springfield was a big terminal in the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
And that whole area was a big abolitionist area, a stronghold. So there was a lot going on to bring people into society there. But nationally and for the record industry and the music business, there was a large black population there, or a significant one. So therefore, they were marketing to that population. And if you came with stuff, you could go, in those days, with record stores, you could ask for what you knew you wanted, you know, and they could go and get it. They had distributors and they could ask for it. So it was a lot different than what it is today, where whatever it is they got is what you get, you know. Also, so that kind of like put everybody in a particular lane. So you didn't, unless you heard the blues beyond, say, Jimmy Rushing, and maybe to some extent Count Basie, or just a bit in the jump blues stuff, you didn't really hear the down home stuff, except kind of closer to Jimmy Reed and Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and those guys late at night. There was a guy over in I think either Rochester or Buffalo, Hound Dog Lorenz used to play stuff. And if you was a radio kid like I was, I listened to the radio deep into the night. And there was always a lot of different kind of music that was on. You hear music out of Chicago, you hear music out of Memphis, music out of as far away as New Orleans. You know, when all the radio stations went down and it would roll up on the skip. But the thing is, the point I'm making is that I would have been just, if I hadn't heard music before the programming of rock and roll or R&B to people came, I would have, gone along with what everything was. But then I went to the university, and all of a sudden, there was this whole kind of folk music thing, which I didn't really particularly care about in the beginning, because it kind of was like Burl Ives, and I didn't really get it. You know, my mom really liked Burl Ives, and I just.
Well, it almost seemed like not as folky as what it was.
What you eventually found out was folk music.
Yeah.
And you know, no disrespect for Burl. He was, guy had an idea, he had a way of putting it across, and you can't, and he followed through. Made records, had a career around it. You know, as you get older, a lot of stuff that you really think about when you're younger, you know, you just realize that, boy, I was nuts.
Yeah.
You know, and anyway, so what was really great was that neighbors in my neighborhood, I mean, circumstance set itself up that around 12, my dad was killed. Mm-hmm. And after that, my mom spent a few years really adjusting herself to the fact that she was a housewife and a substitute school teacher with a degree from South Carolina and a big family. And
how many siblings did you have?
At that point, I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay.
And 5 of us, and I'm the eldest. And so here she was. She didn't have any concept of how to handle the business. My father was from the Caribbean background, and Caribbean men handled business for the house. And so anyway, a number of years later, not that many, she remarried to another man from the Caribbean, this time from Jamaica. And with him, unbeknownst to me, came a guitar.
Yeah.
And then that guitar eventually got spoken about to a neighbor that moved up from North Carolina. And he could play. He could really play. And I mean, he kind of like had the natural keys to everything. He was not a school musician, which is fine by me, because I kept noting that there was a certain kind of snobbery that went along with school musicians that unschooled musicians didn't have.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he came from North Carolina, and up the block from me was a bunch of guys that came from Clarksdale, Mississippi, actually outside of Clarksdale, on Colonel Stovall's farm out there. So they played that kind of John Lee Hooker, Mississippi boogie stuff, and then the inside music was like Jimmy Reed, Muddy Waters, T-Bone Walker, and both T-Bone and BB I found very hard to listen to at first, because I had been listening to a lot of jazz, which is always moving and improvising. And this was a different kind of set. So it took me a little bit to get to that, but all along the music was there, and there was versions of the blues that were there, and classic blues, the stuff that W.C. Handy and those kind of guys wrote, But yeah, I just know that I heard it, I felt it, we danced to it, and it just was something that I never thought it was a good idea to let go.
Yeah. So you're a teenager and you're playing all this stuff too?
Mostly I was playing pretty much, as far as vocally, I could go anywhere.
Yeah.
As far as my playing was concerned, I pretty much stuck in around Jimmy Reed, Muddy Waters, and around there. And then it wasn't until I started going to the university that I got a chance to see some of the other guys in the same way I learned from my next door neighbor. I picked up from them and created my own stuff. Yeah,
you had a different track at university, right? You were going to do farming.
Yeah, I was doing it before the university. I was doing it in high school.
Yeah. What finally made you say, okay, I'm going to commit to music?
No, I was committed to music one way or another.
Yeah.
No, if the farming came first, then the music would just be, what I did.
Yeah.
And if the music came first, hopefully that I would have an opportunity to put together a farm or be involved with it. So one way or another.
Yeah.
It was just like, what I was doing was like dealing with the fact that traditionally the music and the agriculture and the culture and the life were inseparable. And here it tended to be separated because of, probably like Western ideals where you sit in the audience and you're separate from the performer. The performer performs and you wait till it, as opposed to if you went to, like, say, a black gospel church, people are shouting in the audience and encouraging the singer to do something. And it's just a different kind of aesthetic, So I was always trying to impart that to an audience, say, hey, you don't you understand? When you get involved in this music, you are a part of the performance.
Right.
And nobody's going to tell you no.
Yep. So you get out of school, what, 63,
64.
Okay.
And I came up to Cambridge. I got to see a lot of different people, listen to a lot of music. I had the time to be able to do it. I also had an kind of a college R&B band at that time, called the Electras. And we played around the East Coast, all the Ivy League colleges. We went to a big Northeastern mixer at Smith College. Our drummer was a business major, and he made up some cards and passed them out. We worked every weekend, and sometimes even during the week while we were in school. And did that, but all along, then I was really working on my guitar chops. And banjo and mandolin, attempting to figure out harmonica.
Yeah.
You know, and came out to the West Coast with a friend of mine who knew some people out there, knew some clubs. Most importantly, he knew Ry Cooder, and he knew the Ash Grove, and McCabe's Guitar Store. I think Wallach's Music City, a few other places, and got involved when it came out, to the West Coast, and started working with them. Ry was phenomenal. I knew a lot of guys that played guitar, and they were okay, but he was just leaps and heaps ahead of everybody.
Yeah, had he already found success commercially by that point?
No.
He was just a young guy.
He was a young kid that, well, I mean, he had some success working with people like Jackie Shannon.
Yeah.
And maybe some other people that I don't really recall right now. But he was, in that musical, pond out there, he was well known.
Mm-hmm.
And for a 17, 18-year-old kid, he was really playing the music.
Yeah.
He brought, a lot of guys brought the notes. The thing that with Ry not only brought the notes, the melody, the notes, but he brought the body of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And he also was really totally onomatopoeic about the swing and the rhythm. I mean, he could transfer that. And a lot of guys couldn't do that. They didn't even know how to, they didn't know. I mean, they would either speed up or slow down and speed up in the same piece. He was really consistent.
Yeah. So he was playing with you. Who else? Was Jesse Davis playing?
No, Jesse Davis was not in the picture.
Okay.
Jesse Davis didn't start till I started my solo career. All of us were signed to Columbia Records as the Rising Sons as a group and individually.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it was Ry Cooder, myself, Gary Marker played bass, Ed Cassidy, who eventually became the drummer with Spirit.
Yeah.
He was our drummer at that time. And yeah. And Jesse Lee Kincaid. He was the other guitar player and writer.
Okay.
And so, we were a bunch of guys that came with a lot of information. We didn't really have like a group leader or anything. We just really had a group, and we loved, we worked with each other's ideas, which was a little bit difficult for the record company.
Yeah.
I see now that it was difficult for the record companies because they are like, these are brown high top shoes, and we can sell those. On the side, they don't understand if you got anything different than that.
Right.
So the problem with them is that they didn't have any, they couldn't see the future, because what we were doing was eventually, by a year and a half after they stopped with us, everybody was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But you know how they are. They won't leap into something. They wait till it's happening all around them.
Right.
So anyway, that and a bunch of crazy politics around the group kind of like put everybody at odds, with the industry. And then we just sort of all of us just decided that, okay, we've had enough. And rather than break up our friendships and, go away disgusted with one another, we just cleared out, And then here it was, teaching harmonica and guitar and a little banjo.
But you had your solo deal, right?
Yeah, but I didn't really know how well that was.
Yeah.
And finally, what I did is I went like, you know what? You're signed individually to Columbia. Pick the phone up and call Clive Davis. And that's exactly what I did.
He answered?
No, his secretary did. His secretary did. And I told her what was going on, that I was on their label and I had some ideas I wanted to record. And I'd like to talk to Clive Davis, Mr. Davis. And she said, all right, well, I'll take your number down, and that's Taj Mahal. Yeah.
So you were going by Taj Mahal at that point?
I was going by Taj Mahal in 1959.
Yeah.
So anyway, what happened then was about 3 hours later, phone rings and it's Clive Davis. And when it's like, and it's exactly like a certain 45 says, don't talk to the people downstairs in the basement, talk to the top.
Yeah.
Call him. He's going to say no, or you're going to get a message, or you won't get no message at all, which is a message, And so anyway, I told him what I wanted to do. And he quickly said, well, look, I'll tell you what we can do here. We can send out, how about if we send you out some producers? And, they were willing to put that kind of money in, so I don't think they sent, but the one guy out. And that turned out to be David Rubenson.
Yeah, he did.
And I didn't need to hear anything else.
Yeah.
We clicked. He kind of came out of the same neighborhood in Brooklyn that my grandparents were in, and we had a lot of stuff. He was really deeply into Latin music. He was a wonderful person to hang with, and he kind of did me like Damon Dash did Jay-Z. He did the business, and I did the music. He just left me to the music, and that was what I wanted.
Yeah,
I knew what songs I wanted to record, and then the only thing that was difficult was I didn't have a band, and I was kind of sitting in with different bands. I sat in with Candy a few different times, this one and that one, but and then I was helping people make demos and that kind of thing. And I ran into a guy that was playing in a band with a woman named Pamela Poland. And Pamela Poland, Riley Wildflower. And I don't know who was the bassist in that, but a guy named Sandy Konikoff was the drummer. And this guy named Gordon Shryock, he always had, people were making demos, so they need a harmonica player or a rhythm guitar player to make the demo. So I did a couple of things with him, and then he asked me, well, what kind of music was I up to? And I said, well, I really like blues a lot, and I was thinking about putting some stuff together. He says, well, I think I got somebody that you might really like to work with. He said, now he's an Indian, and I said, well, okay. Is there a problem?
Yeah.
He said, no. So I said, well, where can I hear this guy? He says, well, they're playing up at the Topanga Canyon Corral. Him and a bunch of guys, Junior Markham, and see who else, this guy, Bill Boatman, I think was playing, Chuck Blackwell. A whole bunch of them had all come out from Oklahoma behind Gary Lewis and the Playboys and Leon Russell. And, they saw that there was something happening out there, and they were playing in different bands. James Burton was part of that thing. So I went up ultimately to hear him playing. I just heard 5 notes and I knew this was the guy.
Yeah.
It's like, first of all, he wasn't derivative. It wasn't like, oh, he's really great. He's white and he plays like B.B. King. No, I don't need that guy. Oh, he's white and he sounds just like Albert King. Nope, I don't need that guy. I'm talking about, I don't care who you are. What is your sound? Who are you? And that's who I want in my music. And so when I heard him play, I never heard anybody play like him.
Yeah.
There hasn't been. I think probably the closest guy tonally to him there would probably be Robbie Robertson. And Robbie Robertson's plays kind of understated, where Jesse can really get out there and sing it up real loud.
Yeah.
Robbie can play that way too, but his tendency is this wonderful, understated, beautiful tone. And then there's another guy named Willie Hona, and he's a Maori down in New Zealand. He's the only other guy I heard that had that magic coming from wherever it came from. And so, yeah, got a hold of him, and then the guy Sandy Konikoff, who I mentioned before, was a drummer, and he kind of grew up in, I think, Buffalo or Rochester, and grew up around the real deep music that was happening at the time, jazz, groove, organ trios, all that kind of stuff, and he could play. I was listening to how he was playing behind Leaving Trunk the other night. Just sometimes I go back and listen to the records, just listening to the bass player, because you know, and the bass player Jimmy Thomas, he was somebody I used to see come in this club and play with a lot of the play with people. See, he was playing who was playing? I think maybe he's playing behind Big Mama Thornton or somebody like that. And he was good, you know, and I thought he should be in there. And then Cooter came in and played rhythm guitar on those tracks.
Right.
And Jesse Davis played slide. And so it was basically, I just told him, be at the studio on Monday night. And we had no rehearsal.
None?
None.
Wow.
I just knew that these guys could play, and I knew that I could walk around and tell each guy what I wanted them to play. And then when we hit, it would all hit. And then, I mean, that was 1, 2, I'd say probably about 3, maybe 3 or 4 songs on there went that way. And then the other stuff went, Jesse Davis did some arranging. You know, I would sit with him and play the song, and then he'd take his pick and put it in the cleft of his chin and give you a 20,000-mile stare, and hang out there and come back, and then he'd tell Chuck what to play or Gilmore what to play, or I would tell Gilmore, like, in the case of a specific bass line that I want or a rhythm that I want. Just like Leaving Truck, I told everybody the parts that I wanted to play except for Davis and Cooter. Yeah. Them guys could play whatever it was. And then I gave a instruction to the drummer and the bass player how I wanted to play. And then we right there on the spot said, well, we're going to start this. I said, okay, well, I'll just open it up with a harmonica. I said, we'll do it this way. And as soon as I played that part, Davis knew to you know, just set it up that way. So it was a lot of it was very telepathic.
Yeah.
And because I mean, you oftentimes got a call, hey man, I got a gig and we got no singer and we need somebody who plays harmonica. Can you come down? Sure, come down. You know, okay, what key you gonna do it in? G, shuffle 1, 2, 3, and you go.
Yeah.
So these guys are it's really good. Got started there. The second record, we were a bit more. We had by that time we really had a group. It was Chuck Blackwell on drums, Gary Gilmore on bass, and Jesse Davis on guitar and me on dobro and harmonica, you know, and vocals. And the second record, we got, you know, it was more crafting what we did. And by the third record, the Giant Step record, we really got, you know, it really got more sophisticated. And that was one of the things that I saw happen as the evolution of the music. And that's why I put the second album on there of all the acoustic stuff, because I said, this is like what raw material sounds like and all the forms of music. And I didn't realize how much of a Bible that was for so many people.
Yeah.
I had no idea. It was just a whim, because I listened to I saw a lot of double albums were happening at that time. And basically double albums were like sort of more of what went on the first one. And here's some more on the second one. Not bad, but it didn't inform nobody with anything.
Right. But what was, you talked a little bit before about, you know, frustrations with the record labels. Did they go for the double album right away when you proposed that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like I said, David Rubenstein did the business, whatever it was that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even when we did the double album with the tubas and recorded in New York at the Fillmore, you know, Wally Hyder's truck was there with all the equipment plugged in. So we made that great live record. You know, I mean, you know, it's like, you know, I dare somebody else to make a record like that.
Yeah. So what changed after you were getting your own production credit on the records? I mean, I don't hear that much of a departure in the sound.
No.
But
well, a bit of it.
He was just doing the business.
David, yeah, no. Well, I mean, basically, he worked pretty much up through, you know, it's Taj Mahal, the Natural Blues, Giant Step and the Old Folks at Home. And then there was the real thing with the tubas. And then there was Happy Just to Be Like I Am. And then Sounder. And then Who's So Good in Blues. No, Recycling the Blues, and then Who's So Good in Blues. By then, that's when I started being involved.
Right. And you produced, was Mo Roots the first one you did?
One of them, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember reading a story about Bob Marley coming to record and finding that some of the tracks had already been recorded.
Yeah, well, he came, yeah. Well, the long of the story is, I knew some people. I had some people I was really friendly with in England when I went over in 1968 to the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. And that was Denny Cordell and his people over there. Rondor Music, I think it was called. And there was a woman named Janet Dicker, who was a friend of mine. And I think she convinced somebody to send me 2 copies of Catch a Fire.
Yeah.
And maybe 1 copy, and then another one showed up from somewhere else. And I can remember the day I got it. I opened it up and I said, wow, that was like a cigarette lighter. And opened up, and sure enough, it was like a cigarette lighter. Turned it over and looked, I said, that's a rough-looking bunch of characters there. Jamaicans there. All right, wonder what this sounds like. And I put that thing down on there, and as soon as I heard the bass booming out of the speaker, I said, they will never play that on AM radio.
Right.
No, they never did.
Right.
You know. But anyway, Bob, I really became a huge fan. I mean, I had already listened to Jamaican and Caribbean music through my family, you know, and particularly through my stepfather. Not so much reggae, but a lot of Minto and ska and that kind of stuff, you know. So Bob and those guys had come to the United States, and I was keeping my antennas up for them. And I think they were on a tour with Sly and the Family Stone. And, you know, Sly was pretty much full of himself in those days. And he didn't know who these guys were, and didn't pay any attention till he figured out that the music was actually grabbing the audience. Well, he threw those guys off the tour and just left them all scattered around the Bay Area. I found out about it, and I was like really perturbed. It's like, are you serious? You mean to tell me that the music that you're playing, you would be threatened by somebody else playing good music to your audience? I don't get that. The audience comes there to see you, and also hears this group, and that means your stock goes up.
Yeah.
But he didn't see it that way. Threw those guys off. I thought it was the worst thing I ever heard of a fellow musician, you know, doing it nationally, let alone internationally. So I hooked those guys up, and we found a kind of a kitchenette motel kind of place where there was rooms for everybody, and helped them get, you know, settled until they could get things, you know, I guess probably get Chris Blackwell involved with them and pull them together. So, you know, they were always grateful for that. Mm-hmm. And not that, no pressure. It's like, you just do stuff. And then eventually I thought about wanting to work or have Bob involved somewhere in around. So he did. Eventually came, he and Family Man, the bass player, and Skill Cole, the great soccer player, and a guy named Augustus Clavier came to my house, and we kind of had a jam session, and that's where he came up with the idea of talking blues at my house. You know, walking blues, your feet are too big for your shoes.
Yeah. And
we had a great night playing music, and then I got word out to him that I was working in the studio. But by the time we got hold of him, and by the time he got there, we had already been down the line, because, you know, they give you a schedule and here's the time you got to record. But he came in, he was in the studio, and he listened to it, and Family Man requested that they put more treble or tops on the bass, as he would say.
Yeah.
Put a little more tops on the bass. More tops on the bass. Yes, tops on the bass.
So you've experimented with so many different types of music. I mean, that's just one example with the reggae, and I know you have your stepfather was from Jamaica. Was there any type of music that you have, when you're approaching a genre that is not native to you or that's outside of your own experience, how do you approach it?
Like what kind when you say genre?
Or basically, like, you have stuck your foot in every single genre. You've done
Well, yeah,
funk,
I think you're
blues.
dealing from the record companies.
Yeah,
perspective.
right.
If
You're right,
you're
I
dealing
might be.
from culture, how are you going to bring millions of black people into the Western civilization? In some cases, mix them up. And now at 500 years where we've been here, and unless you buy the lane I'm in is the lane I know.
Right.
And so I never bought that.
Right.
That's really clear.
I know, but I guess how did you just
Because they're my
so
relatives.
confidently do it?
They're my cousins.
Yeah.
They're my relatives.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of, it's like, because I listen to when they play toward our music, I mean, see, when you're in the Caribbean or even Africa or South America, you hear American music. You don't hear American music in boxes.
Right.
We hear the world in boxes. It's, this is African music. And then, it's like, that's a real narrow box for what's Africa.
Right.
So, no, I mean, my thought is that the whole experience of coming out of Africa, into the Western civilization just broke up family, culture, blah, blah, blah. So at this point for me, it's just connecting the dots between family I recognize musically.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the farthest out one for people to be able to deal with has been the Hawaiian music.
Mm-hmm.
And that came as a result to me being, as a kid, I would note that some music went through my head and I didn't feel it in my body. Some music went through my body. I felt it in my head, my soul, my spirit, my heart. And the first time I heard Hawaiian music was somewhere around maybe between 7 and 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just shook to the core how deep that music was already in there. And I don't even know these people.
Uh-huh.
And my thought then was, I don't know how it's going to happen, but someday I'm going to find out why. What is it about of this music and these people that reached me at that deep level? Because I've listened to a lot of music,
Right.
from all different types of sources, and some I would sit back and let the musicians that play that music play, because I don't have any direct relationship or connection to it. But most of the stuff that I'm involved with has been, just as I say, again, connecting family up.
Yeah.
After being split up in the diaspora.
Right.
So.
Is there anything you wouldn't try?
I mean, I could jokingly make a heavy metal record. Rap
I bet it would be awesome though.
rap isn't difficult.
Yeah.
No, none of those are, because there's a way. There's a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm as an elder musician. I'm not against what the young kids play.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think that they have to have an opinion about it, and we know what we have to say about opinions. The thing is that to me it's like bebop. Everybody didn't like bebop either.
Yeah.
And I also think it's kind of funny now talking to or listening to the rappers that are now 42 and 46 and 50 talking about the youngsters that are coming along now. I said, gee whiz, that sounds pretty much like what everybody was saying about you guys when you started. The ones that I know have said something really smart, right, at this point, has been David Banner. David Banner was really, really sharp about it. Said, hey, we birthed them, but we didn't show them away. We didn't give them nothing to work with. So they're doing what they can with what they got. Mm-hmm. So we were chasing the money. And while we were chasing the money, we didn't take care of, handing the torch off to them. And so then Snoop Dogg said the same thing. Hey, I'm a grandfather now. I'm grown. When I was coming out, they didn't know what I was doing either.
Yeah.
I didn't care about them either. So, they're going to say what they're going to say.
Yeah. That's interesting. You talk about chasing the money, and you're the last person I'd say would have ever accused of doing that in the industry. You've always seemed to follow, your own instinct artistically.
Yeah, for good and for bad. You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, for good and for bad, you've been in the industry for 50 years now.
Mm-hmm.
That must make you feel pretty accomplished, the fact that you have never compromised. Or do you feel that you ever have?
I may have made, I think I made one song probably back in 1970. I worked with a guy named Bill Green. We tried to made a popular R&B tune on that Satisfied and Tickle 2 album.
Mm-hmm.
And it was okay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I already knew the value of what was going on. Is that with Mo Roots, I had a song called "Why Did You Have to Desert Me?" Why Did You Have to Desert Me? Sold 10,000 copies of a 45 in Philadelphia. Questlove said, when I was on the Jimmy Fallon show, Questlove said, "Man, you got to play that song. We got to play that song." He said, "My aunt used to play that song all the time. I know a bunch of guys from Santo Domingo. They loved it because there's a whole section in there singing in Spanish, and they really loved it, So I knew it was a matter of the record company understanding what it was that I was doing and going for it. But no, they didn't get it. And I mean, at different times I locked horns with them, and then I just stopped. But I would never compromise the music.
Yeah.
It's just like, no, you don't understand. This needs to happen. And if you don't understand it, and they don't understand it, I can't help you.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not leaving my pathway here.
Yeah. What do you hope from this entire career, pouring your heart and soul into music, will be the lasting legacy of Taj Mahal?
I am still.
Yeah, that's an annoying, pretentious question.
No, I'm still busy at it. So I mean, it's like I don't know. I mean, it's like one of the biggest questions that's asked to me. People go like, "Oh my God, you're really great." Blah 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 blah. I remember seeing you. Blah, blah. Are you still playing? I go like, I guess we still have work to do.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because they don't know. I mean, what has happened is that they don't realize is that their information system has gotten, it's important for somebody to have a hold to it because they can monetize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're monetizing it with that which works for them. I mean, anytime they wanted to blow up my spot because of how I had my publishing set up and my business set up, I stood to win. So, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not something to worry about.
You mentioned listening to Leaving Trunk recently. How familiar with your own catalog are you?
Very.
Yeah.
I'll listen to it anytime I want to.
Yeah.
And especially now that stuff's on, on YouTube. I mean, plus what I have myself. I've gone and loaded my laptop up with all the stuff. I mean, I'm not like, no wizard of a computer or digital age, but I can do stuff and get stuff and ask questions,
Great.
Figure out,
One last question I have is what sort of advice you'd give to, our students who are starting out in the music industry?
Learn as much as you can. If I can think of anything that I probably wish I had done a little bit more, is spend more time learning about the music industry and business. I mean, I'm done pretty good with it. I was able to put my kids through school, and that was a big thing with me, and not end up at the end of the whole thing with college debt. None of my children have college debt whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
We did it kind of like as it went along. And I'm very happy about that. That was, pretty much, beside me being who I was doing the way I was doing, I was able to take care of my family and see that my kids were educated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really good.
Wow, that is really good. In a career spanning more than 50 years, one of the things he's most proud of is the fact that he was able to educate his kids. That's saying something. Taj's career is still going strong, by the way. Check out his site at tajblues.com to see if he's coming to your town, because he has dates all throughout the summer. He's playing at the Sioux Falls Jazz and Blues Fest with the Taj Mahal Trio later this month. He's playing with the Taj Mahal and Kev Mo Band at the Hollywood Bowl in August. And a lot of other dates through the end of September. Hey, by the way, September is when we release our serial crowdfunding podcast, and it's going to be good. So stay tuned for updates at online.berklee.edu/take note. For this episode, I have several thank yous I want to say. Firstly, a special thank you to Adam Taylor, who acted as the live engineer on this episode. Thanks to Andrew Walls, who helped edit the audio. Thanks to Gabriel Reifer Cohen for mastering the whole thing. And thanks to you for listening. Talk to you next month.